The rise to power of the Pinochet regime in Chile resulted in a significant shift in federal economic policymaking compared to the previous government of Marxist Chilean President Salvador Allende. Naturally, the impacts of the new and drastic internal policy agenda were not exclusively consequential to Chilean nationals. They also affected international actors inside Chile's economy. Thus, one must pose a crucial question. To what extent did internal Chilean economic policymaking under the Pinochet regime positively or negatively impact its maintenance of power on an international platform? One of the Pinochet regime's central objectives was the maintenance of power and credibility on an international stage through his presidency from 1973 to 1990. Presented with the evidence, it's plausible to conclude the following. Internal Chilean economic policymaking significantly aided the Pinochet regime's maintenance on power on an international stage, although commonly at the expense of the Chilean population. A critical example of domestic policy impacting the Pinochet regime's international reputation was the neoliberalist economic privatizations undertaken by the government's economic department, colloquially known as the Chicago Boys, since many economists working for the regime had been trained at the University of Chicago, pupils of the same privatization theory which Pinochet had an affinity for. Their first action was returning for free a vast majority of economic assets previously nationalized under the Marxist Allende administration. This served as an initial act of goodwill towards foreign investors who had been previously disadvantaged by the forced nationalization of their assets, symbolizing that Chile was open to international cooperation and gaining Pinochet quite a lot of praise on the international stage. The positive effect of this action was especially pronounced in relation to the United States government, which had previously attempted to sabotage the Chilean economy under the Allende administration to remove the Marxist power from South America. Due to Allende's nationalization program, the Nixon administration had encouraged the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, to destabilize the Chilean economy through hyperinflation measures and covert support of a truckers' strike which paralyzed the transport and agricultural sectors in 1973. This domestic economic action led to a reversal of economic pressure, allowing Pinochet to acquire America as an international ally and supporter. However, the international legitimacy Pinochet had gained had to be sustained over an extended period, leading to further national policies enacted by the federal government to improve foreign relations. Following an initial round of privatizations in 1973, the Chicago Boys pushed for two extended privatization periods spanning from 1975 to 1981 and 1985 to 1990, respectively. The former dealt with privatization of the banking sector, which had been nationalized the prior half-century, forcefully transferring assets from government stakeholders and selling assets to large firms and investors for incredibly low prices, estimated by economist Mario Marcel to have been subsidized at a rate of 27 to 69% each. Foreign investors consumed tremendous portions of the Chilean banking sector. This increased the dependence of various nations' gross national product and economic well-being on the Chilean government stability. Thus, governments whose wealthy citizens owned large Chilean investments would back the Chilean government during international disputes, allowing Pinochet to forcefully maintain legitimacy on a global platform. Chile's privatizations especially resonated with the US Reagan and British Thatcher administrations, since they mimicked much of the same deregulation they attempted in their countries. Although, some would beg to differ with the previous assertion that the economic privatization of banks benefited international stability, since economic circumstances degraded soon after the first privatization spree ended in 1981, due to various factors such as the radical transfer from a public to private system, low credibility in the banks, and the 1981 international recession. The newly foreign-owned banks did not fare well during the Chilean recession of 1981. 14 of 19 private banks declared bankruptcy by 1983 and were purchased by the Chilean government. Chile was mocked for having followed the, and I quote, Chicago road to socialism. Yet, there is a more optimistic rebuttal based on international reactions. Admittedly, international opinions of Chile sank initially, yet the Pinochet government began handsomely purchasing the banks at pre-recession valuations, saving foreign investors from heavy losses. He looked the hero at the time, having spent 4% of the Chilean gross domestic product, or GDP, bailing out approximately 2,000 wealthy investors, improving the government's reputation internationally at the expense of recession-time social programs, such as unemployment benefits for 600,000 unemployed laborers, equaling only about 1.5% of GDP yearly. Additionally, the banks were resold again during better economic times after 1983, once again at extremely low prices, which made foreign investors and nations' dependence on Chilean success increase. Larger nations would have to align themselves internationally with the Chilean government. Furthermore, a similar process occurred with the privatization of services which had been public since the establishment of the Chilean Republic, including the implementation of a mandatory private alternative for Chilean workers' pensions in 1980. As with the banking sector, pension funds did not endure the 1981 to 1983 financial crash, and had to be bought and resold by the Chilean government during better economic times. Naturally, this was executed in the same fashion as the banking privatizations, allowing for the same saving face process on an international scale, which the Pinochet regime ultimately benefited from, increasing their international credibility despite the extended recessionary period. This system generated a stable source of foreign investment for the Chilean government, much of which was generated from a 3-company bankers trust operating in the pension industry. By the late 1980s, this trust maintained 55% of Chilean pension funds and holdings in 13 of the nation's largest corporations. In this fashion, the Chilean government under Pinochet could amass backing among the international private sector, bolstering its reputation as a desirable hub for Southern American operations. Although, privatization periods were not the only reasons why international corporations saw Chile as a beneficial location to conduct business. Pinochet had greatly relaxed labor regulations through the enactment of the 1980 Labor Code by the Chilean government, which eliminated the power of union leaders in companies. Union officials who opposed the privatizations were intimidated, fired, and/or bribed. Furthermore, employee safety regulations were relaxed, and the minimum wage was decreased significantly, allowing for lower operating expenses for international businesses, further tying international dependence on Chilean economic success. Western nations such as the United States, United Kingdom, and even Canada were more likely to tolerate the ethically dubious practices of the Pinochet regime. Yet, it was not only critical to please the private sector, but also international governmental organizations, which could potentially discredit the Chilean government. rather than using money collected from the sale of public assets to benefit the Chilean population, surpluses were consistently siphoned off to debt repayment through multilateral disbursements, pleasing crediting organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank, or WB, since said multilateral disbursements rose from approximately $10 billion under Allende in 1973 to about $70 billion under Pinochet in 1981. Due to the second round of economic privatizations from 1985 to 1990, the Chilean government was able to retain high levels of surplus disbursements up until 1988, when the country was already in turmoil. At the expense of the Chilean population, Pinochet retained positive relationships with international governmental organizations and creditors. The Chilean government, under President Pinochet, did present an economic policy which was quite desirable to international investors, global governmental organizations, and a variety of Western nations. Domestic economic policy making during the Pinochet regime actively bolstered Chile's reputation and legitimacy on the global stage, mitigating external threats to his rule. Yet, this international respect and backing for the regime came at the cost of properly maintaining positive relationships with the Chilean people, at whose expense these policies were crafted. Thus, Pinochet's downfall in 1990 came not at the hands of foreign actors, but from the Chilean people, who had been undermined through his outward economic and legislative view. Internal policymaking for the Chilean economy played a significant and positive role in maintenance of the Pinochet regime's power internationally. Yet, in looking outward, the regime forgot about the disadvantaged and increasingly dissatisfied population. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below the video, and also check out some further readings we included in the description if this topic interests you. Have a great day. Bye!